I am New York.
Я сам Нью-Йорк.
I am New York.
Yo soy Nueva York.
Sono New York.
Je suis New York.
Welcome to Diverse City, where we explore New York's eclectic enclaves, one neighborhood at a time. I'm Zyphus LeBron. From hip-hop to hot dogs, many of the neighborhoods that we visit have connections to history that enriches the city's cultural impact on the country and even around the world. Our special episode this month will highlight some of these stories that we've covered over the past year. On this episode, Can't Stop, Won't Stop, Why Bulldozing Buildings in the Bronx is a blow to hip-hop's history. Grand Ideas, an area built on grand plans that's not exactly lived up to its name. And Every Dog Has Its Day, the food fight that's forever linked to American culture. Those stories and more coming up on this special edition of Diverse City. Right off the 2-5 train near the Bronx Zoo's southern entrance is a set of buildings you can't miss, the Phipps Lambert houses. These low-income duplexes, whose color and shape have made them stand out along the block, are being torn down and replaced with high-rises. That's prompted some former residents to create a documentary series that looks back on Lambert's hip-hop history. The film also investigates issues concerning the residents as they transition into the new buildings. Shannon Ayala tells us more.
This street sign at 180th Street and Boston Road, named after Arthur and Dorothy Cryer, tells a story of music and a community. Arthur Cryer sang bass on famous doo-wop tracks like this.
Pretty little angel eyes, pretty little angel eyes, pretty little angel, pretty little angel, pretty little, pretty little, pretty little angel.
But after writing for Motown, Cryer returned to his native borough where he moved into the Lambert houses. He took a job running a block association, organizing youth talent shows and sports programs. That made him one of a web of community figureheads, as Herc Bradley remembers.
We have community activists and we have matriarchs, that help groom us, from Mr. Arthur Cryer, who was a community activist.
Bradley says Cryer was a mentor to Lambert youth who became hip-hop pioneers, such as DJ Tony Tone, who founded the Cold Crush Brothers and lived on the same floor as Cryer. And other Lambert natives.
Like Sha-Rock, and we call her the mother of hip-hop. She was the first female MC.
Sha-Rock is the woman with the magical touch. I'm like burning fire. I'm just too much.
And Raheem from Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five.
Raheem, in your life, what more can you ask? I bet you can't think of a greater task.
Then we have Donald D.
Magnetizing your mind with rhymes on top of a beat. It's like crime.
And then we have the original Spinderella, which is from the female group, Salt and Pepper.
Salt and pepper will boom into the room.
It was just an amazing time. It was like the beginning of hip hop, and we had some of the founders of hip hop right around us. So yeah, I remember the times going to the park and they plugging in equipment and the street lights, and my mama coming to get me from down the block, like get in the house. I remember all of that. It was just a really, really incredible time.
Brenda Baker, also a Lambert native, has been collaborating with Bradley on a project called Lambert Houses Documentary on YouTube and local BronxNet channel, BronxNet. The series aims to capture Lambert's hip-hop contributions and check in with current-day residents. Bradley no longer lives at Lambert, but remembers the meaning the place held for him when he and his family moved there, when Lambert opened in 1973 as nonprofit, low-income housing.
Quite a few of us we grew up in tenement walk-up tenement buildings, old buildings, rodents, just run down environments. So moving into Lambert, which is a brand new building, is an experience. It's like it's a fresh new experience.
Lambert is run by Phipps Houses, the largest nonprofit developer and management company in New York City. The company was founded by philanthropist Henry Phipps in 1905. The online architecture magazine Urban Omnibus says that when the low-income development was built in 1973, it was considered, quote, a significant architectural and social contribution with progressive credentials. Now, Phipps is demolishing the 731 jagged complex, replacing it with high-rises with twice the number of units.
I created the documentary because they're tearing down Lambert. For me, it's like they're dismantling a part of hip hop, which is Lambert Houses.
Phipps's vice president, Matthew Washington, says instead of doing piecemeal renovations, Phipps opted to address issues stemming from the design.
This development being 50 years old and having, need for repairs and work to be done, we really looked at not just each building, but the entirety of the campus of Lambert Houses to say, what can we do to enhance this?
But Bradley and Baker still really care about their community and are investigating complaints. Tenants say they're being downsized to smaller units and that the process to get new apartments can be an ordeal.
We're trying to get a understanding of how, what's the requirements to get into the new buildings. A few seniors were able to be basically accepted into the buildings, and a few other people that I know of who was able to get into the building. It took them about a year.
But Baker says she's especially concerned hearing from residents who say they don't see as much community programming as there once was.
It's very, very important. After-school programs, community programs, very, very important in all communities. So yeah, that part, that's why I'm always asking people what was their experience, because that's dear to my heart,
Washington says there are actually more community programs now, so much so they've outgrown the original community center. They've moved into a new space at 178th Street and Boston Road. He says the issue could be residents are unaware of the new space and programs. Shannon Ayala for Diverse City.
We're staying in the Bronx for this next piece. The Grand Concourse is a 5.2-mile-long thoroughfare, dotted with architectural gems from various time periods throughout history. It's most famous for the high concentration of Art Deco works along the boulevard. Vanessa Monet tells us more about the grand transformation of this once wooded parcel of land.
The Grand Concourse was, the early architects looked at it and thought it was a bit drab. So the idea was to really kind of spruce things up in this one area and make it kind of this very chic, very urbane place to live for wealthy New Yorkers.
Roger McCormick is the education coordinator at the Bronx County Historical Society. He says the Grand Concourse was always meant to be, well, grand.
The Grand Concourse was designed and modeled after the Champs-Élysées by the French engineer Louis Ries, who was from Alsace-Lorraine. And at the time the Grand Concourse was, when we were thinking about developing it, it was mostly farmland in the Bronx, and it was being industrialized pretty rapidly at the end of the 19th century and the turn of the 20th. And Louis Ries was hunting, and he noticed this ridge going down the Bronx, and he said this would be perfect to have a road here. And the original name is called the Grand Boulevard in Concourse, but it was then shortened to just the Grand Concourse. And the idea was that you would have a major road to rival Park Avenue and Fifth Avenue in the Bronx.
Construction began in 1894 and carried on during the height of the city beautification movement. This was a reform philosophy of architecture that introduced beautification and monumental grandeur to cities across North America. 1904 saw the opening of the IRT subway system connecting Lower Manhattan to 145th Street. And by 1905, service was expanded to the Bronx. This created easier access to the city center and led many immigrants who lived in crowded tenements downtown to seek out more space uptown.
So you have this huge explosion of population of people fleeing the tenements from the Lower East Side, because at the time the Bronx was much more open and cleaner. Especially in the Grand Concourse, you have a very huge concentration of Irish, Italians, and Jewish New Yorkers. And in the early to mid 20th century, the Grand Concourse was seen as the place to be.
One of the buildings adding to the glitz and glam of the neighborhood was the Bronx County Courthouse. The now landmarked building was constructed in the ornate Art Deco style and today serves as Bronx Borough Hall.
The building itself has a number of friezes that are dedicated to justice, great themes in the Bronx, such as the Battle of Pelham Bay.
Another landmark work which added to the area's elegance is the Andrew Friedman home. Friedman was a wealthy businessman and principal owner of the New York Giants at the turn of the 20th century. The house, which was designed in the French and Italian Renaissance style, was supposed to be a place where the rich, who had lost their wealth, could find refuge.
And in the early 20th century, in 1907, there was a Great Depression, not as severe as the one in 1929, but a great economic downturn. And many of his rich friends lost almost everything they had. So this led Andrew Friedman to think, what if this happened to me? How would I get by? So he founded what was kind of like, I guess, an incipient form of a nursing home. That it would be this home for the indigent, and they would be given cultural activities, and they'd be taken care of in their old age, even if they weren't wealthy.
When it opened in 1924, the residents of the Andrew Friedman home lived there for free, but over time, the trust's money ran low. By the 1960s, occupants were required to pay rent, and many moved out over the next 2 decades as white flight took off in the area. This flight was in part due to America's economic downturn in the early 70s. That hit New York City, particularly the Bronx, very hard. As these whites left the area, minorities who were denied homes in the suburbs because of practices such as redlining moved in. That had consequences.
There's this huge pullout from investors. They wouldn't give money for certain areas that were seen as undesirable. And it's taken a long time for that stigma to go away, at least from the Bronx. Robert Moses, the roads, a lot of people were pushed out, and expressways and highways kind of just gutted what were once, very vibrant communities.
While the Bronx was going through this transformation, legislators took steps to hold on to some of the area's early character.
In the 1970s and the 1980s, the Concourse area had become a bit run down. So that was kind of the impetus to make it a historic district, so that those buildings would not only be maintained and kept looking nice, but also that they wouldn't be torn down for development. So in a way, it's ironic because they were built during a huge flush of development, but now the idea is that you wouldn't want to mar the historical past of the Concourse.
For Diverse City, I'm Vanessa Monet.
We found this story in downtown Manhattan, in Two Bridges, where we are today. Hidden among the temples and nail salons on Monroe Street is the Downtown Music Gallery. We head down to the basement with Craig Thompson, who tells us the story of this iconic record shop.
When we moved here, there was no other stores on this block. There was no restaurants, there was Chinese temples, and maybe a grocery store at the end of the block.
Bruce Lee Galanter relocated Downtown Music Gallery to Monroe Street in 2009. That was after the rent at his previous store on the Bowery was raised by 250%. But to Bruce, location is secondary.
It's a dream job. I've always wanted to work with music. Getting to meet musicians and meet customers all the time and talk about music and listen to music, it's a beautiful thing.
Downtown Music Gallery opened originally in 1990 and is one of a dwindling number of music retail stores left in the city.
People find their way here because they know we specialize in something, or they read on Google that there's maybe only a handful of stores left, so they come here to see what we have. There's other people who come in that are looking for weirder, more eclectic stuff, and this is kind of their home. Every row here is a different type of music. World music, modern classical, older classical, Canterbury, and progressive in downtown.
Downtown music is a vibrant and experimental music form from which the store gets its name. Yoko Ono, Fred Firth, and John Zorn were some of the early pioneers, and Galanter was transfixed by the music they played.
John Zorn used to play with a tabletop and mouthpieces, and he wouldn't put his sax together. He'd just play mouthpieces with bird calls and a cup of water. What he did didn't make any sense to me, and I said, Fred, why do you play with this guy? He doesn't put his sax together. He doesn't play anything that I could recognize. And Fred would look at me and he goes, he's trying to invent a new vocabulary for the sax. Be patient.
Galanter became friends with a lot of these musicians, and his store became a de facto home for downtown music.
I've watched his career evolve and watch him as a composer actually grow and change and evolve. And that's a large part of our business. Right. They now have 900 CDs, books, t-shirts, you know, it's unbelievable.
Galanter has documented the scene for over 30 years and even delivered a lecture in Denmark on downtown music. And in addition to being a bit of a historian, Galanter supports the scene through in-store concerts.
I like kind of sponsoring concerts and giving people a chance to play. The gigs are free, doesn't cost anybody any money.
So what's the future of this unique musical outpost in Two Bridges?
This year is our 30th anniversary, which is, most stores don't last that long. And we're happy, I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy this is going to continue. This music needs a home.
For Diverse City, I'm Craig Thompson.
The Abrams Arts Center is well known for its rich cultural programming and connection to the immigrant populations that call the Lower East Side home. The center's executive artistic director, Craig Peterson, tells us more about the Performing Arts Center in his own words.
The Abrams Arts Center is basically the arts division of the Henry Street Settlement, which is a very large social service agency that's been around since the late 1800s. In the early 1900s, the settlement built a playhouse, which has become quite famous on Grand Street. And I currently run that building on Grand Street, which now houses all of the arts activity for the settlement. And the Playhouse was built by our founder, the founder of Henry Street Settlement, Lillian Wald. And Lillian Wald was a nurse who had started Henry Street Settlement in 1893. And there were these two sisters, their names were Iris and Irene Lewison. They approached Lillian Wald and said, let us build you this playhouse. We'd love to have a place where the community can come together and perform. It would be a great opportunity for the children. When they built the playhouse, unbeknownst to Lillian Wald, the sisters also kind of had eyes on Broadway. So immediately this place became a place where aspiring artists and professionals wanted to work, and the community was also coming in to do performances. One thing that's important to note is that Lillian Wald, who was working with a largely immigrant population, she kind of went against the norm of the time, which really pressured new immigrants to Americanize. They really wanted, these immigrants to sort of leave the old world and become American. And she believed if you wanted to become American, you had to have some kind of connection to your roots. And her belief was through the arts was how people could have that connection. And over the course of the 1900s, many different populations began to come in through the neighborhood, partially by immigration and partially through housing policy. Most of them were Black and brown. It was sort of this interesting cultural moment where New York City just kind of pushed people to the edges of the island. They kind of pushed everybody into the Lower East Side. What we really try to do is figure out how to talk about issues that are important in our immediate neighborhood and lift those up in a way that can become part of a broader dialogue. So things like income disparity or gun violence or cultural identity of a specific group. We start to think about how can we present work and work with an artist who wants to talk about one of those particular issues that really connects on a local level to a lot of the people in the neighborhood, but it can then also get elevated into a broader discourse. We've consistently been working with an artist named Emily Johnson, who's an Indigenous artist, not from New York. she approached us about developing land acknowledgements and considerations for how we acknowledge Indigenous people and the history that came before us, or the fact that we are on land that was occupied before colonizers arrived. And so she and some folks from the Lenape Center, us got together to develop this language around a land acknowledgement. But I brought it to the rest of the settlement at Henry Street Settlement. And so now there's a land acknowledgement in every building of the settlement. The biggest challenge that all arts organizations have, like really trying to figure out how to get people to see them and realize that it's a space for them. And that takes a lot of work. It's ongoing work. It depends on what you program. It depends on how you offer your services. And we're always experimenting with that.
Finally from us, this piece about hot dogs as we head into the dog days of summer. Hot dogs have become synonymous with Coney Island, so much so that a specific brand of dog, Coney's, is named after the neighborhood. The food that's become a prominent symbol of Americana has a history that's often connected to two immigrants who worked in the area.
The smell of cooking hot dogs, cooking sausages, to fill the air. The smell of stuff coming from deep fryers filled the air in Coney Island. So there was an ocean breeze, yeah, but these other mingling with this cooked food element is just amazingly seductive. People came for it, they yearned for it.
The man waxing a little poetic about Coney Island's hot dog mystique is Professor Bruce Craig. He's a food historian who's written 2 books and several papers on the subject. He says that hot dogs are inextricably linked to Coney Island, in part due to an apocryphal tale about a German immigrant named Charles Feltman. Legend has it that Feltman was the first to put a German sausage into a bun around 1867.
There's no real evidence for that. There was a Charles Feltman for sure, and he was a famous restaurateur and a bigwig in Coney Island. But he was a baker in the middle of Brooklyn who saw the opportunity in Coney Island and got the railroads to build a railroad out there.
Feltman did also build a restaurant out there from which he sold high-end food as well as hot dogs. At the time, the area was still an island and the stomping ground for the wealthy who got there by boat. The railroad made it easier for the growing middle class to get to Coney Island. America's middle class began growing after the Civil War. In New York, their search for cheap entertainment and cheaper food took them to the boardwalk in the 1860s.
By then in America, wherever there's a popular amusement or recreation, there's going to be food. And in the North, after the Civil War, peanuts became popular and sausages soon followed. The two go together, really. And they were sold along the beach in Coney Island.
Feltman wasn't the only one selling sausages on the boardwalk. Other immigrants used this sort of penny capitalism to create jobs.
Street food is the quickest way to get into an economy. It doesn't cost you much for ingredients, and you can sell them at low prices and in considerable volume. And it's a cash business.
One of these men was a Polish immigrant named Nathan Handwerker. Handwerker worked as a baker for Feltman at his boardwalk restaurant. Then, as the story goes, 2 renowned celebrities of the time, Jimmy Durante and Eddie Cantor, advised Handwerker to strike out on his own. He eventually started selling his hot dogs for a nickel when Feltman's were a dime. This was just one tactic he used to sell his products that were as good quality as Feltman's.
He was a marketer. For example, when people thought that hot dogs were not healthful, because who knows what went in them, right? Could be dogs. He dressed up a couple of actors as doctors in their white coats, and they stood outside eating hot dogs and extolling to the public, saying, "Well, these are great. These are really good for you."
Handwerker's dogs eventually became more popular than Feltman's, and their story became the age-old tale of student outpacing master. Handwerker eventually opened the now iconic hot dog stand called Nathan's in the location that it still stands today.
I don't think it was a battle between them. I think they were 2 distinct differences. Feltman's sold sausages, but their main business was the shore dinner, which they invented, and that's fried clams and fresh seafood with sausages, of course. But it was a sit down place, and Nathan's wasn't. Nathan's didn't have seats. You just walked up to the counter, got your hot dog, and walked away.
Much as the Nathan's brand has walked away with the collective imaginations of many foodies and tourists who continue to visit the stand today. The shop has become a big part of the boardwalk's history and mystique, while the original Feltman's eventually went bankrupt and disappeared around 1952. That's our special look at some of the cool history and culture that we found in the areas we explored this past year. Join us next season when we'll bring you even more stories from the small neighborhoods that make up the Big Apple.